Hello, and welcome to the Walrus Talks, Canada's Health Security, presented by Johnson & Johnson in partnership with Rotman School of Management. I'm Jennifer Hollett. I am the Executive Director of the Walrus, and I'll be your host this evening. We are thrilled to be here in person in Toronto at the Rotman School of Management in Desautels Hall and streaming live online at thewalrus.ca. I want to say hello, and it's okay to make some noise as we do this. Hello to the over 800 households who've registered for our live stream. Can we give them a warm welcome? We encourage you all to share highlights of this conversation on social media. You can tag us at The Walrus on your platform of choice and use our hashtag #WalrusTalks. A hashtag is also a great way for us to connect the conversation here in person to our audience tuning in from across Canada and beyond. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are gathered within the bounds of Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit. This land is also the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Today, Toronto is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Here at the Walrus, we're honored to carry on a tradition of storytelling, and we encourage you to reflect on the land that you're on, whether you're with us in the room or tuning in online. A bit about the Walrus. We started as an optimistic project over 2 decades ago to foster conversation across Canada. We recognize these conversations are complex and necessary, so they take place in many forms at the Walrus. You can find us online at thewalrus.ca, in print on newsstands, or by subscribing to the Walrus. I see many of you have the Walrus in your hands. You can also listen to our podcast or take part in events like this one. And this work is made possible and powered by our donors, our supporters, and our partners. So thank you all for joining us, and to Johnson & Johnson and Rotman School of Management for working with us and sponsoring tonight's event. To tell us more, please welcome to the stage Rotman School of Management's Director of the Sandra Rotman Center, Rosemary Hannum.
Thank you all for being here today, whether in person or online. My name is Rosemary Hannum, and I'm the director of the Sandra Rotman Center for Health Sector Strategy here at the Rotman School of Management. It is my privilege to welcome you to today's talks on Canada's health security, a discussion that could not be more relevant or urgent for our times. At the Sandra Rotman Center, we focus on the challenges and opportunities within health systems, drawing on expertise in areas like patient safety, organizational strategy, and leadership development. Over the years, we've contributed to critical reforms in health policy, including initiatives on primary care, health regions, and funding structures. In doing so, we've aimed to help governments, organizations, and leaders build health systems that are resilient and effective in the face of complex challenges. Today's topic, Canada's readiness to face crises, aligns closely with our mission. Recent events have underscored the vulnerabilities in our systems and the pressing need to strengthen coordination and response capabilities. While some progress has been made, significant gaps remain. And these gaps are not just about healthcare. They affect how we respond to environmental disasters, global supply chain disruptions, and other emergencies that ripple across society. As we gather today, we'll hear from thought leaders about how Canada can better prepare for the future. How can we build systems that are resilient, proactive, and able to withstand the pressures of the next pandemic, the next natural disaster, or other systemic disruptions? And critically, how do we ensure that the lessons from past crises are used to shape a stronger and more responsive framework for the challenges ahead? At Rotman, we believe that tackling complex problems requires collaboration across disciplines, across sectors, and across regions. The insights shared here today will contribute to the broader conversations and strategies that we champion at the Sandra Rotman Center, where we seek to equip leaders with the tools and perspectives needed to address these pressing issues. On behalf of the Center and the Rotman School of Management, I thank the Walrus for their partnership on this event, and I thank all of you for taking the time to be part of this conversation. I'm confident it will be a session full of insights and ideas we can all translate into action. Thank you.
Promoting this event, I tweeted, "Are we ready for the next COVID-19?" And someone replied saying, "Actually, we're still in COVID-19," which is true. I mean, I heard a lot of laughter from the front row here. That's where our talkers are. But in many ways, it's not just the next COVID-19. There's a wide range of epidemics, pandemics, and threats ahead. So I appreciate that so many people are interested in this conversation because we are living it in many ways day to day. Unfortunately, Dr. Sylvain Charlebois is ill and he won't be able to join us tonight, so we wish him a speedy recovery, but we have a great lineup of talkers ahead. We'll be hearing from Dr. Fahad Razak, Canada Research Chair, Data-Informed Healthcare Improvement, University of Toronto, Internist, St. Michael's Hospital, Unity Health, Toronto. Brian Golden, Sandra Rotman Chair in Health Sector Strategy, Director, Global Executive MBA for Healthcare and the Life Sciences, Rotman School of Management, University of Toronto. Jessica Hill, MPH, BHSc, Director, Health Emergency Management, First Nations Health Authority. Angelique Berg, President and CEO, Canadian Association for Pharmacy Distribution Management. Leah Cowen, Vice President, Research and Innovation and Strategic Initiatives, Professor, Department of Molecular Genetics, University of Toronto, as well as Dr. Allison McGeer, Professor, Department of Laboratory Medicine and Pathobiology, University of Toronto, Senior Clinician Scientist, Lunenfeld-Tanenbaum Research Institute, Sinai Health. Our speakers have 7 minutes each, sharing with us a variety of perspectives. Thank you all for being a part of this.
Good evening. My name is Fahad Razak. I'm an internist at St. Michael's Hospital and a Canada Research Chair at the University of Toronto, focusing on healthcare data and analytics. Today, I'm going to talk to you about steps Canada needs to take to prepare for future health emergencies. But first, as the COVID-19 pandemic approaches its 5-year anniversary, let's start by considering the health emergency we all just experienced. The pandemic was the greatest mass mortality event in Canadian history. More Canadians died of COVID-19 in the past 5 years than in World War I. And the distribution of those deaths was extremely unequal, with catastrophic impact, for example, on vulnerable groups. Consider what happened in long-term care. And critically, this was a whole of society crisis with impact well beyond health and the health system. There were huge disruptions in the workforce. Unemployment nearly doubled in those first few months, with particular damage to lower income and less educated Canadians. Many small businesses closed, losing a generation of wealth and efforts. And we kept our kids out of school much longer than most other countries, with the second highest rate of school closures in the G10 industrialized nations. But remember, we were making decisions with bad options and with limited information. Restrict public movement versus allow the spread of disease. Close schools versus exposing kids to a new virus with unknown health effects. And in this context, there's also much to be proud of in the Canadian response. Among G10 countries, in those first 2 years, we had the second lowest mortality rate. To illustrate how much better we did, if we had followed the US pandemic trajectory on a per capita basis, 70,000 more Canadians would have died in those first 2 years. That means each of us would likely know someone, a family member or a friend, who is alive today, but would have died if we had followed the US course. That is striking. We had the highest rate of COVID vaccination for those first 2 doses in the G10. This means we were able to handle everything from the procurement challenges to the logistical complexity of distributing a vaccine across a huge geography, to educating the public about the value of this incredible innovation. And many of those tough early tough early decisions were made without a lot of political division compared to many other countries. Contrast this to the political divisions in the United States, for example, where COVID mortality rates were 40% higher in red states versus blue states. We did not see that in Canada. These stats only underline what we all know too well. Health emergencies can be far-reaching in their consequence and can fundamentally change society. As we come out of the haze of this time, it's important not only to look back, but to look forward, to ask what elements of our response should be preserved and what could be improved next time. Building on this context, I want to tell you about the recommendations of the Walport panel, tasked to produce the only external federal review of our experience of the pandemic. Over the past year, I had the great privilege of joining 6 other Canadians, including one of our last panel speakers tonight, Dr. Allison McGeer, as we crisscrossed the country meeting with hundreds of stakeholders. Our report was published last month and laid out 12 recommendations based on the advice that we heard. The panel's remit was limited in some ways, thinking about areas such as risk assessment and advisory, and today I wanted to share with you 3 of the most actionable and urgent recommendations. First, Canada should create a risk register. A risk register is a systematic and constantly updated review of risks that can impact health. It then dictates what steps we should take to prepare. Crises could range from pandemic illness to heat waves to a solar fire that knocks out our telecommunication capacity. And the way we prioritize those risks dictates whether Canada should, for example, stockpile a vaccine or build mass cooling facilities. Second, Canada should have a consolidated, centralized science advisory structure. Consider that in 2020, as the pandemic accelerated amid intense pressure on institutions, fear, and social dysfunction, nearly 40 new ad hoc science advisory bodies were created across Canada to respond to the pandemic. Many of these had overlapping mandates and drew on the same small pool of expertise, and many of these left smaller communities behind. This building of the plane as it was being flown is exactly what you would like to avoid in any future crisis. Instead, create that centralized advisory structure now, reduce duplication, and ensure it spans appropriate expertise. Third, we must maximize the use of research and innovation funding. Sadly, Canadian funding for research and innovation on a per capita basis is now the second lowest in the G7, roughly half of what is spent per capita in the United States or Germany. And given these deficits, especially in a crisis, it's crucial to coordinate what existing resources we have. But in the pandemic, we had the disheartening situation where research funding in some instances supported competing studies, making each too small and too slow to have an impact that matched the furious pace of the pandemic. And this has major consequence. For example, if you were critically ill in the United Kingdom, you were 5 to 10 times more likely to be enrolled in a life-saving COVID-19 trial than if you were in Canada. One of the principal reasons for this difference is the UK's coordinated research approach. As we prepared our report, it was striking to see that gaps identified 20 years ago in the SARS-1 report still plague us today. SARS had a massive impact on Canadians, but societies always race to forget the worst, it seems, hastening for a sense of normalcy. 20 years from now, will we say the same for how we responded to the COVID pandemic? And more worrying, what if it's less than 20 years to the next crisis? Last year, we saw wildfires so severe in Canada that we had mass evacuations in some of the most polluted cities on Earth. If you consider infections with pandemic potential, the WHO has declared a public health emergency 3 times in just the last 5 years, for Ebola, for COVID-19, and for Mpox. And right now, we are on the cusp of a potentially extremely worrying breakthrough event with avian influenza, as more and more animals are impacted. 1/3 of all cattle herds in the state of California are now infected and positive. Last year, an avian influenza outbreak in sea lions resulted in a mass mortality event of at least 24,000 deaths. And in the past few weeks, a severe infection has occurred in an otherwise healthy BC teenager without a clear exposure event. Whether a breakthrough mutation of avian influenza occurs, one that allows transmission between humans and sets off a devastating new pandemic, is simply out of our control. Mutations like this are a roll of the dice. Whether climate change accelerates and we see increasingly catastrophic wildfires remains unknown, and much remains to chance as well. That is why, in an uncertain world, I believe the only responsible approach is to act on what we can control. That is, to be prepared. The title of the panel's report that we published is called "The Time to Act is Now." Investments now to allow timely and actionable data on where a disease has spread. The capacity to assess health impacts and system strain in a crisis and to be able to act on those. A coordinated response using the best available science representing diverse perspectives, and rapid innovation in treatment and prevention. The time to act is now. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rotman School. I'm Brian Golden, the Sandra Rotman Chair in Health Sector Strategy here at the school, and have led our research and advisory activities for the last 22 years here, at a time when the center included just me, then joined by Rosemary, and today we have nearly 20 faculty. My comments today are a product of all of our collective work. I'm not a finance person, but a systems and behavioral scientist. But I'm going to start with a finance scenario. I'd like you to imagine first that you are a sophisticated stock investor with shares in J&J, Apple, Ford, and Pfizer, all highly research-intensive companies. All are doing well, but Apple and Pfizer announced today that they're going to cut their research budgets by 80% to distribute current dollars to their current shareholders. Some inside Apple and Pfizer make the argument that R&D is too uncertain and a bird in the hand, or dollars today, are more valuable than two in the bush or future gains. Now, what happens to Apple and Pfizer in the stock market? Investors like you begin to sell the stock short, no doubt about it. They bet on their decline because they are anticipating a decline in the expected value of these research-intensive firms. But not J&J and Ford, even though they are investing in a very uncertain world. What's happened to Apple and Pfizer in this very fictitious scenario is that they have signed on to what my former dean and colleague Roger Martin called the cult of efficiency. Systems that are designed to be ultra efficient but can't withstand unpredictable shocks, hence getting caught flat-footed without sufficient PPE, vaccine capacity, underdeveloped supply chains, too few nurses, and the list goes on. But perhaps most important, feeling proud of our efficient health system where we don't have any physicians or nurses or others sitting on their hands with extra time. No extra PPE and ventilators sitting in warehouses because we don't need them today. If you were running an auto plant at 100% utilization, you'd win an award. But even in the private sector, some leading organizations choose to over-resource and staff. Again, Roger talks about in his most recent book, Costco, where they have incredible data. They determine to the person exactly how many people they need on the floor, and then they add more. And they add more because it increases customer service. We had a shockingly high number of hospitals at 100% capacity pre-COVID, more today, and we should be embarrassed by that. The cult of efficiency. As a system researcher, I find the World Health Organization's characteristics and attributes of resilient systems to be very helpful. They are awareness, mobilization, self-regulation, integration, diversity of providing a range of services, and transformation, which I would call learning mechanisms. Let me just say a few things related to all of these, and then a bit more. We in Canada and across the globe struggle with many of these attributes because we have underinvested in preparation in several domains of our health system, broadly defined. We've already heard, and I would echo this, If you look at the hardest hit by COVID, the most vulnerable, low income, inadequately housed, lacking access to primary care, that's only gotten worse since the start of COVID. This is all about the well-known social determinants of health. We need massive investments in health, not healthcare, to build resiliency. We have, in my view, an inappropriate mix of health-human resources. Physicians are critical to health systems, no doubt about it. But of course, so are other health professionals who also require less training and are less expensive to train and who simply cost the system less and are absolutely appropriate and essential to our system. In no other industry I'm aware of will a business use the most expensive resource to produce something, a product or a service, when less expensive and appropriate resources are available. We do that regularly. We need to get the mix right, and we can look to other health systems that are less reliant on physicians. Thankfully, the Canadian Institute of Health Information and its focus on workforce planning is encouraging here. This isn't to reduce or minimize the power of any category, but we have an inappropriate mix of health human resources across Canada. To do that, we're going to have to reconceptualize our payment and employment models, a discussion that would take far longer than 7 minutes. But at a minimum, we should be focusing on the value we get for healthcare spending, a focus of our work here at the school, and not just the amount we spend. We spend plenty in Canada, just on the wrong stuff often. Speaking further of payment models and incentives, we need to make it financially attractive to invest in redundancy. We can't demonize the private sector and for-profit motive when all is calm and good and then lean on them in times of crisis. We saw wonderful examples with our creative destruction lab here, bringing the private sector and inventors together during COVID to set up thousands of testing sites. And this allowed private companies to stay in business and keep our economy going. We, of course, have a siloed system. As a former American, I naively came to Canada thinking, coordination should be easy in a single-payer system. I was surprised. We're starting to make considerable advances around digital connectivity, and we need to continue investing mightily in that, and again, equivalent to peer countries. Also, our playbooks and our processes and protocols need to be developed and regularly updated, not just for institutions. Lastly, partnerships and supply chain. I'm no expert on supply chains, but many of my colleagues here are. This is going to be a really interesting time for supply chains around the world. There will be, given the events south of the border, many walls built by the US, including trade walls. And these will change the nature of supply chain landscape. From a resilience perspective, that could be good for Canada if we take this opportunity to diversify our resilience away from the US. But I'm actually nervous about that for the US and their supply chains. And when they suffer, the entire world economy suffers. So what can we do? I was recently reading about the French Revolution and recently had some conversations with health system leaders in China and Saudi, and these stories are related. Big changes were growing or based on anticipated or real mass dissatisfaction. In China and Saudi, regardless of what you think of their regimes, they are making incredible investments in their systems and are forward-looking. We need to move away from our cult of efficiency and support our government leaders and, in fact, demand investments from them, investments in slack resources, more training, and to mix my metaphors, cut those policymakers some slack when they overinvest. That's what resilience requires. If we don't do it, the world will rightly sell Canada short. Thank you.
Let me just bring this down. Good evening, everybody. Sego Sewa Guego. My name is Jessica Hill. I am Mohawk Nation Bear Clan from Six Nations of the Grand River Territories. I currently serve as the Director of Health Emergency Management for our provincial operations with the First Nations Health Authority. And throughout my talk today, you'll hear me kind of go back and forth between the First Nations Health Authority, and you might hear me use the acronym of FNHA. So today, a few elements I want to touch on is in the short 7 minutes that I do have, I want to do some context setting. So level set the information that I want to share with you today from a BC context. I also want to revisit First Nations perspectives and how we see things of our health and our wellness. And I also want to highlight a few tried and true practices that FNHA continues to hold in health emergency management and try and sprinkle some stories of resilience throughout. So to really set the context, British Columbia has a unique and diverse population of First Nations. There are just over 200 First Nations, including 26 cultural groups and 34 diverse languages. Most of the First Nations live urban and away from home, which is about 57%. 51% of those communities are fairly small. And when I say fairly small, about maybe 500 or less residents living on reserve. 41 of those 200-ish communities are either isolated or rural and remote areas as well. So from FNHA standpoint, the FNHA plans, designs, and funds the delivery of health and wellness programs to First Nations across BC following the transfer of these services from Health Canada in 2013, and that's when FNHA was born. We like to say FNHA is in our tween years, and we like to focus around transformative approaches to health and wellness. So I want to share a little bit about our First Nations perspective on how we see health and wellness. Our worldview is very holistic and relational in nature. We view the whole of an individual, which includes the spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical aspects of ourselves. It is important that we nurture and that we balance those aspects in order for us to be healthy and strong. And in the fact that we acknowledge that we're all interconnected. We're interconnected with all the living things around us, the waters, the lands, the plants, the animals, and that we're only one with an entire ecosystem. And so when I put it into context around health emergency management and FNHA, I think it's really important that we define what is health emergency management. It could mean different things to different individuals. And for FNHA, it's really an emerging area that focuses on the health impacts of individuals, families, and communities during states of emergencies when we're experiencing these. And First Nations in BC, they face a wide range of natural and human-caused hazards that lead into disasters that can impact health and wellness. The most significant that we've been seeing is drought, wildfires, floods, landslides. We've also just experienced a rock slide as well. Marine spills, pandemics. And then we're also seeing ecological changes from the global warming, which is impacting marine toxins and food security for communities and First Nations. We're also seeing severe weather events. We've just had severe weather impacts of power outages on the island. So we're working really hard to, really kind of collaborate and get that better. It's also important to acknowledge that the health emergency management landscape is continually changing, and it's becoming more and more complex. And this requires all involvement from all levels of response agencies and government. So with FNHA, we play an essential role in ensuring the health and well-being of First Nations during these health emergencies, and that just looks like, we help provide health-focused preparedness and planning. We walk through response and mitigation alongside communities, and we also partner with them in recovery phases. Our approach to health emergency management is very holistic, inclusive, and we tend to invoke a collaborative framework that ensures that our health emergency strategies are culturally appropriate, community-specific, and effectively integrated with traditional knowledge and practices. And so a few examples in how we do that. I want to highlight a few, actually. One is working with communities and partnering with them. We lead with culture. FNHA provides mental wellness and cultural supports on the ground for response, mitigation, and recovery phases. For example, we've increased our response time when a community is evacuated or put on an evacuation order. They tend to get displaced from their communities. FNHA folks is quickly to respond and actually will meet them at the site so that they have a friendly, familiar face to see and help navigate those resources and emergency support services on the ground. Another way, in terms of planning and preparedness, we really emphasize the Build Back Better principle to strengthen that community resilience. So looking at the resources, how can we build back better in order for the next time we're ready? We also recognize that community members are subject matter experts. Too often, we deem traditional knowledge lesser than Western scientific knowledge. And I think it merits, having that equalization across the two. I'll give an example. So in July of this year, a landslide occurred in the Chilcotin River, causing a complete blockage of the river's flow. This caused significant impacts on the salmon, which is their food source, and it also caused impacts around cultural sites. The nations in the area were on site almost immediately, and they started to begin building traditional mechanisms to reroute the salmon already. That knowledge was already passed on intergenerationally from their ancestors. And they actually began nation-to-nation sharing for resources to stabilize that salmon habitat. So that's just an example of how traditional knowledge can really come into play and really be helpful for communities on the ground. Another way that we focus on is that we lift up and we embed cultural knowledge and teachings within health emergency management practices and processes. So the First Nations Health Authority, we have a close collaboration with the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, and we're looking to create culturally safe spaces for evacuees that are free from racism and discrimination interactions. So together, what we did is we developed a complaints pathway to immediately address those cultural safety concerns and ensure that the individual and family is heard, and that we improve cultural safety and humility practices across our health system partners to break down those barriers. We want our communities, we want our families to feel safe if they need to be displaced from their homes. So with that, I think I just want to leave you with a key takeaway is that, FNHA's work is very much community driven. It's from the bottom up. And we continue to adapt, and we continue to adapt to the emerging needs and priorities that are coming from communities and nations. FNHA does strive to transform those practices and those processes to better serve our First Nations communities and nations as we like to meet them where they're at. So with that, I will say thank you so much, Nyawa, and I will pass it on. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Angelique Berg, and I'm the President and CEO at the Canadian Association for Pharmacy Distribution Management. Founded in 1965, we are the nation's trade association for the pharmaceutical supply chain, focused on pharmaceutical distributors and their trading partners. Distributors are the critical intermediaries connecting hundreds of drug manufacturers with more than 12,500 hospitals and pharmacies across the country. Together, they form the pharmaceutical supply chain that delivers over 90% of all medicines consumed in Canada. Together, we ensure the safe, reliable, timely, and physical access to medications. So I'm talking about those people that actually touch the product, that bring it to you. Before the pandemic, and much like water or electricity, few Canadians gave much thought to how their prescriptions got to their pharmacy or how hospital inventories were managed. We just assumed it would always function, no matter what. But like any infrastructure, the pharmaceutical supply chain requires investments to stay robust in normal times and adaptable during crises. But to invest means that there is some cushion between income and expenses, and this supply chain is running on razor-thin margins. Ours is a controlled market where all stakeholders want lower prices for medicines, and those are set by governments and their agencies. Distribution is funded as a fixed percentage of drug prices in the low single digits, dependent on the province. The percentage is the same whether that drug is going to downtown Toronto or to Moosonee, completely disconnected from the cost to serve those regions. So as governments reduce drug prices, distribution funding has reduced also. Prices for generic drugs, the most commonly used products, cardiovascular protection agents, lipid-lowering drugs, they have dropped by over 70% since 2007, reducing distribution funding by the same amount, or an estimated $50 million per year, and they have not increased since. That's no increase, no raise since 2007. Distributors are also not benefiting from the newer, higher-cost medicines, such as the precision medicines, those really exciting advances in cancer care and rare and orphan disease treatment. These drugs typically move from the manufacturer directly to the facility where that patient is being treated. And for those that do move within the supply chain, the funding percentage is kept. That's our income line. The costs have soared. Regulatory and operating costs have increased at least 2.5 times faster than distribution volumes in the past decade. New temperature control regulations added $20 million annually in needed investment to technology. Inflation has driven up fuel prices, warehouse costs, labor costs, and the result is a supply chain that's stretched thin with little room for investment in critical infrastructure or innovation. Prior to the pandemic, this supply chain operated in relative obscurity, mitigating thinning margins through automation, streamlining, and cost and service reductions. Distribution centers fell from about 50 across the country to about 30 today, meaning that product has to travel much further to get to the patients. Safety stocks to withstand short-term disruptions were reduced. Saturday deliveries were eliminated. Frequency to rural pharmacies were reduced. So when that pandemic hit, it hit with a bang. In its earliest days, along with hoarding toilet paper, patients were refilling months of their prescriptions at a time, quickly depleting the meager stock that distributors held. Rural pharmacies ran thin on everything due to the less frequent deliveries. In hospitals, demand spiked for COVID-related treatments, outstripping pharmacy medications. And critically, propofol that was used for surgeries was protected to sedate patients for intubation. It was a mess. Globally, demand for everything was high and supply was unstable. But Canada's supply chain actors did come together, and they coordinated a deliberate slowing of the product flow. Pharmacies limited refills to just 30 days at a time. Manufacturers and distributors equitably allocated product, allowing supply to catch up. And it did stabilize, but it was an incredible amount of work on top of their usual work. When the mRNA vaccines arrived, supply chain actors made significant purchases of walk-in fridges, freezers, and frozen packouts to meet new frozen storage requirements. And then they had to actually deploy those across 9.9 million square kilometers of mostly rural land, over roads, just 40% of which are paved, folks, amid temperature swings of up to 50 degrees Celsius. And they did it. But could they do it again? None of my members will answer that question. The pandemic exposed our weaknesses. It showed us that safety stocks, critical drugs, are needed to withstand production disruptions. Aging IT needs upgrades to respond automatically to production demands. Aging IT systems need upgrades to respond, to respond accurately to servicing rural areas. And capacity is needed throughout the supply chain to enable scale for emergency response. With funding controlled, costs must be reduced to match funding, but the remaining cost reduction measures are still to come, and they're going to impact patients. We haven't hit that balance yet. These decisions are being made all along the supply chain, and I wish the pharmaceutical supply chain was unique, but we're not. Distributors are not unique. This is happening in businesses everywhere in healthcare because our income is controlled. Canadians should have affordable access to the medicines they need. But looking at the issue through the narrow lens of lowest cost today has unintended impact across the supply chain. And it could create inequities in drug access in normal times and ill-equipped to withstand future crises. We need to have a rational discussion about affordability and accessibility and collectively decide where we want the government to invest. There are some promising ventures: the PharmaCare Act, Canada's Drug Agency, the Health Emergency Readiness Canada. But we need to keep physical access and that discussion front and center and hold governments accountable as an active electorate, ensuring we vote and that we tell our representative what we want. We're all here today because we are interested and concerned about Canada's health security, and we each have means and responsibility to make our voice heard for a strong and responsive and healthy tomorrow. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Leah, Cowen, Vice President of Research and Innovation and Strategic Initiatives at the University of Toronto. I've just finished dealing with a bit of a health emergency on my own situation here, so my voice is a little different than usual. I'm also a professor in the Department of Molecular Genetics and a Canada Research Chair in Microbial Genomics and Infectious Disease, and director of the CFAR Fungal Kingdom Threats and Opportunities Program. My research examines the biology and evolution of fungal pathogens, which have a staggering impact on human health. My lab seeks to discover and develop new strategies to thwart drug resistance, and I have also launched a startup company in order to translate those discoveries into new health solutions. I am in the business of imagining and preparing for threats that you don't want to think about. It is a great privilege to be able to do that at the University of Toronto and to lead the research and innovation enterprise. In my role, I'm reminded daily of the amazing breadth and depth of our research expertise, the faculty, the students, and staff who are working tirelessly to understand our world and to solve global, grand challenges, including those that have a very profound impact on the health and well-being of Canadians. We are very fortunate to have equally talented and innovative partners at 14 hospitals on the front lines of treating patients in the Greater Toronto Area and across Ontario. The university's relationship with our hospital network means that the research that happens in our labs translates directly into the healthcare system. This network is known as the Toronto Academic Health Science Network, or TASN, and it is among the top such life sciences and health sciences research hubs in the world. Together, the university and its hospital partners are ranked third in the world for health research by Nature. Almost 5,000 researchers and scientists are working in this research cluster. In addition, there are more than 10,000 physicians serving across the network. This is what from lab bench to bedside means. How does this global powerhouse of research protect Canadians against new health threats? As a network, it increases the resilience of healthcare systems, diffuses knowledge throughout the different hospitals and research sites, and connects researchers to cutting-edge research from around the world. But not least, it makes the most of publicly supported infrastructure. My colleagues speaking tonight have shared many wonderful stories and examples in these areas, and I will share a few additional resources that we have developed together and how they ready us for the future. The first is EPIC, which stands for the Emerging and Pandemic Infections Consortium. EPIC has received lots of support from stakeholders, including government and industry, to support the country's health security. It connects researchers and experts at the university and across Tasman to combat infectious disease and prepare for future pandemics. EPIC houses the Toronto High Containment Facility, which is the GTA's only facility used to study high-risk pathogens and viruses by hospitals and industry researchers as well. The facility is a unique asset in the life sciences ecosystem in the region, in operation for more than 2 decades. It was the first lab in Canada and one of the first in the world to isolate the new coronavirus in March of 2020. The facility and its highly trained staff played a really critical role in accelerating research breakthroughs that guided the pandemic response, including, for example, methods to allow safe reuse of personal protective equipment in healthcare settings, and also to ensure safe milk banking for premature infants. We are currently working to modernize the facility to advance Made in Ontario therapeutics. For example, Markham-based Odessa Biotech is conducting a phase 3 clinical trial for a drug to treat acute respiratory distress syndrome, a common complication from COVID-19, as well as influenza infections. In addition to industry partners, the Toronto High Containment Facility has been used by federal and provincial agencies like the Public Health Agency of Canada, the Bank of Canada, the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, and beyond. Government investments in health security through the $2.2 billion in Canada's biomanufacturing and life sciences strategy is supporting our network to connect with others across the country. Through the Canadian Hub for Health Intelligence and Innovation in Infectious Disease, or HiCubed, we have 90 partners, which includes hospitals, universities, colleges, and community organizations, as well as industry, are developing health threat surveillance platforms and next-generation precision interventions. In the process, the network is building a highly skilled workforce to support Canada's growing biomanufacturing and life sciences sector. Third, most people know how important research networks were to mapping and observing new variants of the COVID-19 virus. That work continues and is building capacity to address health threats around the world and in the global south. For example, U of T's Temerty Faculty of Medicine and Dalla Lana School of Public Health, together with the H2I Entrepreneurship Accelerator, are engaged in the Africa Health Collaborative, which is assisting to train healthcare professionals. These are just a few of the exciting and innovative initiatives at U of T that demonstrate our research and innovation excellence and our capacity to work with partners to develop new networks, collaborate with industry partners, and build preparedness for health emergencies. What I haven't mentioned is some of our research initiatives in drug discovery, precision medicine, regenerative medicine, and the excellent clinical care and U of T's role in training the next generation of talented students who will be our future doctors, nurses, pharmacists, scientists, policymakers, and innovators. So what do we still need to do? If we want to build a rapid response and Made in Ontario therapeutics strategy, we need to attract capital. The university works with life science startups to find capital at all stages of the commercialization pipeline, and we have dedicated accelerators for health startups. Federal and provincial support programs all help, but the competition is global, and Canada is behind, as noted, in public investment in growing our ecosystem. Most importantly, we need stable investment in discovery research, fundamental research. You have heard about how each part of our healthcare system increases health security. At the foundation of this national supply chain is research. I'll end by saying that everyone here is deeply committed to improving Canada's health security, and being part of this diverse and collaborative ecosystem is a part of that commitment. The uncertainty south of the border also presents an opportunity. With continued investments from government, industry, and other partners, we can attract and retain amazing talent and continue to lead in this space. At that, I will say thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Allison McGeer, and I'm an adult infectious disease physician at Sinai Health, who had the misfortune to be thrust into the middle of SARS-1 low these 20 years ago, and have spent the last 20 years making a somewhat vain attempt to pay back all the people who came to rescue us during that emergency. So I have the advantage over some of the people here of age and long experience with emerging infectious diseases and other things that you don't want. I've been asked to talk about what the changes are since the first SARS event, and I'm going to start with the things that have not changed. And one in particular, and the reason for that is I understand why that's true, but I keep hoping that if we talk about it enough, that somebody will find us a path forward to make the change that we've all agreed we need to make, okay? I can quote you long lists of reports. Most recently, the commission of the Royal Commission for COVID Inquiry in New Zealand got published about a week ago. And what's not changed is that we undervalue and underinvest in public health. Your public health budget in Canada represents about 1.5% of the healthcare budget. And that would be okay if public health wasn't largely responsible for us living long, healthy lives. You think about your life, we all tend to think that the things that have made us live longer and feel better are better cancer treatment, biologics, precision medicine. It's not true. Okay? I've been in healthcare for a long time. I think I'm important. But what's making us live longer, happier lives is almost entirely public health. It's called vaccines and safe food and water and not smoking and responding to the opioid epidemic and getting rid of high sugar, large volume drinks. And, I could go on. Transit, poverty reduction, okay? These are the things that really matter. But we're not going to do that. And the short answer to why we won't invest in public health has to do with my professional life in infection prevention in a hospital. You know what a really good day in public health or infection prevention is? It's a day when nothing happens, right? But the key issue is understanding that it's not nothing happening just by chance. It's nothing happening because people are working really hard to make nothing happen. It's impossible to wrap your head around that fact and to fully appreciate it. And I've had any number of discussions. I remember very clearly a discussion with a quite famous head of ICU in a hospital that I was consulting for about an infection prevention program in their ICU that was not a totally inexpensive program. They looked at me and they said, "So I don't understand what it is that is causing you to spend all this money. If we had a problem, I can understand you doing something about it, but we don't have a problem." And I'm like, have you thought about why you don't have a problem, right? But none of us do that. So if there is someone in the audience who has the key to us moving forward on being able to invest in public health, that more than anything else is what we need. Because what public health people do is prevention, right? And if we doubled their budget, that would be the single most important thing we could do about pandemic preparedness, because pandemic preparedness is what they do for a living, and they're good at it. Okay, so we're not going to have that, though. So let's talk about what we might have, okay? What we got at a system level nationally in Canada out of the first SARS outbreak was the Public Health Agency of Canada. What we got in Ontario was Public Health Ontario, both intended to do the same thing and both given really ambitious mandates about responding to emerging threats and reducing infections. And neither one of them have really lived up to their promise, okay? Not perhaps surprisingly, given funding and just how much we were expecting of them. So when COVID came, I think all of us were a little disappointed in both of those organizations and their ability to respond. And that leaves governments with a choice now about what to do, right? You can either say, okay, these organizations are what they are. It's not like they haven't done a bunch of good things, but they're not going to be able to live up to what we wanted them to do in terms of preparing for emerging threats. So we need to rethink what they're doing, rebuild, reimagine what these organizations are. Or we can say, just going to leave them the way they are, and let's try to build something else. And I don't actually know what Ontario is doing, which doesn't mean people aren't thinking about it and doing something, just that I don't know about. At a federal level, we have made a conscious decision, and that conscious decision is that the Public Health Agency of Canada is having its budget reduced back to pre-pandemic levels, taking a lot of cuts, so we're not making that kind of change. And that's maybe not as disappointing as you might think it would be, because one of the things that we learned from the COVID pandemic, or relearned maybe from the COVID pandemic, is that pandemics are not just a health event. Pandemics are a whole of government event. And so leaving health with the entire responsibility for preparing for pandemics, not probably the best idea. So we have two things at a federal level that are starting now. The first is called the Center for Research on Pandemic Preparedness and Health Emergencies, okay? This is good. I wasn't supposed to use acronyms tonight, and you can't make an acronym out of that, so that's good. And that is part of the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, which are a federal research funding body. And their goal is to fund pandemic preparedness research and to build the coordination of research across the country during pandemics so that we have less duplication and more focus when we do that. How well that's going to work? Well, as my great-grandmother used to say, the proof will be in the pudding. I think there's a lot of concern that that center is currently a bit narrowly focused and probably underfunded, but we will see how they will do. The intention is clearly of significant value. And the second one's already been mentioned, which is the Health Emergency Readiness Canada, and that is outside of the health portfolio. It's in innovation, science, and economic development, which those of you who are as old as I am might remember as Industry Canada. And that organization is a mix of the US organization called BARDA, which is a government and industry-funded organization to develop new technology for therapeutics, for diagnostics, for emerging infectious diseases of all sorts. And the European Union agency, which is called HERA, which is a much more public health-focused organization than what we're now calling HERC, Health Emergency Readiness Canada. The goal is to create an ecosystem in which we invest in new technology, we develop new technology for Canadian manufacturers, we build life sciences capacity so that we are ready for the next pandemic. At a personal level, I have to say I would have liked to see more of a mandate on emergency preparedness and on public health in HERC. But again, there's lots of room to move within that mandate, and I think there's no doubt that whatever comes out of it will be really helpful with moving us forward. I'm just still not sure that we've learned the lessons about public health. And then lastly, I'm going to, because my timer is off, so I don't even know where I am in my 7 minutes, okay? I'm going to steal another minute and just talk a little bit about what Fahad talked about science advice to government and how difficult that was. And the good news is that you can see already that the Public Health Agency of Canada is, I think the right word, experimenting with having different science advice committees and sort of trying out for size the different size and shapes, because science to government is a really large challenge, and science to government about emergencies is even harder because you don't know where the next emergency is coming from, and you don't know who you're going to need. And so building structures that will work for that, I think, is really difficult. If you read the Wellport report that I had the honor to be part of with Fahad, it's very much based on a recommendation that we build something similar to the UK. The challenge with that is that SAGE for the UK, their Science Advice Committee, worked beautifully before the pandemic, did all sorts of nice work, but really didn't function well at all during the pandemic. And so to me, the science is still open on what the right structure for science advisory committees at a federal government are. And so what we really want to see is that the federal government is working on trying, and the provincial government, working on trying out those strategies to see how we can build them so that we get the best science advice to government going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fahad Razak, Brian Golden, Jessica Hill, Angelique Berg, Leah, Cowen, Allison, McGeer. Thank you for your work, for your talks, and to Allison's point, thank you for nothing. Yeah, we don't appreciate it when things are calm and simple and there's nothingness. Tonight's event wouldn't be possible without the support of Johnson & Johnson, a longtime partner of the Walrus. Please join me in welcoming now to the stage Geneviève Lavertu to tell us more.
Hello, my name is Geneviève Lavertu, and I'm Director of Government Affairs and Policy for Johnson & Johnson MedTech here in Toronto. And you may wonder, what is the interest of J&J in this particular topic or this particular event, or to have this one fantastic contribution by our speakers? There's a story behind that. And back in 2019, before what happened, there was an idea that wouldn't it be wonderful to work with an organization like BARDA to be prepared for the next health emergency that could happen in the next century. So 2019, Johnson & Johnson and BARDA came together and created an initiative called Blue Night. And it was actually launched, I think it was April 2020. By then, you'll remember, it was already a bit late. We were all in lockdown Nonetheless, we stayed at it because the idea behind that was conceived before we were in a pandemic, and the work is continuing post-pandemic. And you'll see where I come back with some of the takeaways from today. So what is the intent of the collaboration? It's dedicated to anticipating potential health security threats, activating the global innovation community, so regardless of where good ideas come from, but I would say in the recent years, focusing a little bit more on countries like Canada, UK, and similar types of allies, and amplifying scientific and technological advancements with the aim to prepare for and respond to our rapidly evolving global health environment. So this is channeled through an organization here in Toronto called JLabs, and that JLabs site is part of the Blue Knight Network and also collaborates quite a bit with University of Toronto and does amplify scientific and technical advancements, including looking for capital. So I'm glad that some of the acronyms were taken care of for me before, but some of the takeaways from today. Health emergencies can change society. This is why we started it, and this is why we continue. We're going to get a risk register if the recommendations are implemented, and this will serve to identify and anticipating potential health security threats that we all need to start working on right now. Health system resilience is part of health security. And for this, what is resilience? It's investing in health system preparation, meaning it's investing in that delta that makes you ready to withstand a shock, and focusing on the value that you get from healthcare spending, as opposed to cutting corners. Something I found really interesting as well from Jessica on the FNHA emergency management is that it includes a recovery phase. Now, that's not something I hear very often, and it leads with culture. And it was really a learning experience to see concretely how traditional knowledge comes to inform emergency preparedness and recovery. So also, when you think of the whole chain, is do we have the right risk identified? Do we have the right science? Do we have the right health system to be able to deliver? Really, to understand health system resilience, you need to understand supply chain resilience and the weak links in the last mile distribution, because you might have made it all the way to there, and then your vaccines go unused, or your treatments don't get there, or you don't have anybody to deliver them. So that was really informative, and why were we interested in fostering this discussion here today is because we're having the same kinds of conversations lately here in Canada in light of the formation of Health Emergency Readiness Canada that affords us the opportunity to build bridges with organizations like HERA in Europe, like BARDA in US, and look at those risk registers and what we do with them and who's best at doing what and where's our particular unique contributions we can make here in Canada. So if I leave you with 2 assignments from today, is I'd like you to think what for you was the takeaway from tonight, the one you carry with you, and that you'll share with others. And the second assignment is to think about, before you go home and before you log off, for those who are online, how is that going to change what you do tomorrow? Thank you.
Thank you for that assignment and recap. And I know one of the things I'm going to be thinking about on the TTC ride home is the importance of public health and how it touches us all and really has a much larger definition. And we do hope that you continue this conversation because there's a lot of power in this room, not only in the diversity of who is here, but healthcare and health is about people. That includes all of us. All right, I'm now going to invite our talkers to stand up and make their way to the reception. As they do this, I'm going to tell the rest of our audience in the room and at home a bit more about what we have coming up at the Walrus. If you enjoyed tonight's event, our last talks for 2024 is on Wednesday, December 4th. You can join us online for the Walrus Talks at Home Polarization. It's sponsored by the Canadian Race Relations Foundation and Inspirit Foundation. The talks look at the problem, but also solutions of increasing political, social, and cultural polarization. We also want you to stay in touch with us at the Walrus, so please sign up for our newsletter. We have a table set up in reception. You can do it there, or you can opt in the follow-up email that you will receive tomorrow in your inbox. If you like what we're doing and want to read more, subscribe to the Walrus. For those of you who are with us in Toronto, just for you, we have a full year subscription to the Walrus. That's 8 issues delivered right to your door for just $25. This is a great deal compared to what you'll pay for magazines on newsstand. So just stop by the Walrus table and we can set you up. It also makes for a great gift this time of year. The Walrus is home to Canada's community-supported conversation. That means our journalism, our events are made possible by people like you. Unlike other journalism organizations, the Walrus is a registered charity with an educational mandate. This guides what we do. Our independent fact-check journalism is powered by donations from our community of support. So in the spirit of Giving Tuesday tomorrow, if you'd like to ensure that we can continue doing this work, consider making a donation at the Walrus. You can do so online at thewalrus.ca/donate, or come by the Walrus table in the lobby. All gifts of $20 or more will receive a charitable tax receipt. Thanks again to everyone at Johnson & Johnson and the Rotman School of Management for making these talks possible this evening. Thank you to our annual sponsors, Air Canada, Bullfrog Power, Inspire, RBC Emerging Artists, and Rogers. And thank you all for attending in person and online and being a part of the Walrus community. I look forward to continuing this important conversation. Have a great evening.